Good morning, beautiful children. And here we are again to read the next chapter in Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of NIMH. Today, our chapter is called Captured. Let's review a little bit about yesterday. Good readers always summarize before they start reading. So, here's what I was thinking. The rats, we learned, um, had a very good existence in the rose bush. We learned how they got there. We learned how to do the electronics and all those great things they have. But we also learned that they're not very satisfied with how they're living, and they were looking for a new place to live. And they found it in Thorn Valley. It doesn't sound like all of the rats are enthusiastic about changing the way they live and moving to Thorn Valley. So there seems to be a bit of a disagreement between Jenner and Nicodemus. I'm wondering what will come of that today. And I'm wondering, this really piqued my interest. The name of this chapter is Captured. I wonder who will get captured. And so we begin. Speaking of schedules and countdowns, Mr. Aegis spoke suddenly, we've got one for this evening. It's getting late. The clock was on Nicodemus's desk, said 5 o'clock. Mrs. Fitzgibbons feeds Dragon at 6 p.m. He spoke gently, but his voice had a chilling sound to it, and they all looked at her. I'm ready, she said quietly, but there are still a few minutes and one question you have not yet answered. Why did Jonathan never tell me anything about Nim or any of the rest? Mr. Aegis said. Well, I'll try to explain. When Nicodemus and the others moved into the cave near the rose bush, they invited Jonathan and me to stay with them. After all, we had been with them for many months by that time, and at first we did, but after a few weeks we decided to move out. We were, you realize, different. We both felt strange associating always and only with rats, even though they were our close and good friends. As for me, I wanted more solitude, less less action, and less society. Jonathan, on the other hand, he was younger than I, and he felt very lonely. So we moved, at first together, to the basement of the old farmhouse where I still live. Then Jonathan met you. At a stream near the woods somewhere, I think he said. Yes, said Mrs. Frisby, I remember that. From then on, he worried. He didn't want to be secretive, but he didn't know how to tell you one thing. I'm sure Nicodemus has explained to you that the injections that we got at NIM had two effects. One of them was that none of us seemed to be growing any older at all. The children, yes, but they are not adults. Apparently, the injections had given us all a much longer lifespan than Dr. Schultz had even ever anticipated. And you can see why this would have been a dreadful thing for Jonathan to have told you. Why, you never would if you never had the injections, and that meant, while he stayed young, you would grow older and finally die. He loved you, you see, and he could hardly stand for that thought of you dying. Yet, if it was distressing to him, he thought, how much more painful would have it been for you? That is what he could not bring himself to tell you. He would have told you eventually, I'm sure. I know he intended to. Indeed, you would have found out yourself. Why, you would have seen it happening. But it was hard. He kept putting it off, and then finally it was just too late. Poor Jonathan, said Mrs. Frisby. He should have told me. I wouldn't have minded. But will my children? Oh, also will they have longer lives? Said Nicodemus. Well, we don't know yet. We think so, but our own children are not yet old enough to be certain. We do know they have inherited the ability to learn. They master reading almost without any effort at all. He stood up, took out his reading glass, and looked at the clock. But Mrs. Frisby interrupted him. One more thing, she said. Whatever happened to Jenner? Nicodemus said. He left. He was against the plan from the very start. In our discussions, he tried to persuade others to oppose it too. Only a few joined him, though there are some others who are still doubtful about it. They're going to stay with us and try it out. The argument stayed reasonably friendly, But the last straw for Jenner was when we decided to destroy all of the machines we'd made. Destroy them? Yes, for two reasons. One, so that if anyone ever finds the cave, there won't be any evidence of what we've been doing, nothing but broken bits of metal, debris that will look like ordinary junk. We'll pull out our electric cable, our lights, and our water pipes. We'll close up all the tunnels leading to it. And the second reason, the other reason that it was important, when we move to Thorn Valley, we're going to have some hard times, and we know that, and we're braced for it. If the cave is still open with the machines and the lights and the carpets and the running water still here, why, there will be a terrible temptation to give up and move right on back to the soft life. We want to remove that temptation. But when Jenner heard of the decision, it was made at a meeting, he grew very angry. He denounced us all as idiots and dreamers. He stamped out of the meeting, and a few days later he left the group forever, taking 6 of his followers with him. We don't know where they went, but we think that they will try to find some place where they can set up a new life just like the one we have here. Well, I wish them luck, but they'll have trouble. There won't be any toy tinkerer this time. They'll have to steal the machines. They're going to have to steal everything, for that matter. That worries us some, because if they get caught, who knows what might happen. But there's nothing we can do about it. We're going ahead with the plan, and once we get to Thorn Valley, I think that just then is when we'll be able to stop worrying. Justin stood up. It's time to go. He picked up some paper with the sleeping draught in it. Mrs. Frisby, Justin, and Mr. Ages walked together the long corridor to the rosebush. Now remember, when you come up through the hole in the kitchen floor, Mr. Ages said, you'll be under a cabinet. It's low, but there's room to move. Go a few steps forward and you'll be able to see out into the room. Now Mrs. Fitzgibbons will be there getting dinner for her family. They eat at about 6 o'clock every night, and when she's got their dinner ready, why, then she'll feed Dragon. He won't be in the kitchen, you see, but he'll be waiting just outside the kitchen door on the porch. She doesn't let him in while she's cooking because he makes such a pest of himself, rubbing against her ankles and getting between her feet. If you look to your right, you'll see his bowl. It's blue, and it has the word Kitty written over and over and over and around it. She'll pick it up, fill it with cat food, and put it right back down in the same darn place. Then watch closely. She'll walk over to the door to let him in, and there is your chance in that instance. Her back will be toward you. She's got to walk about 20 feet. It's a big kitchen. The bowl will be about 2 feet away from you. Be sure the paper packet is open. Dash out. Dump the powder into the food and dash right back. You don't want to be in the sight of Dragon when he comes in. I can tell you that from my own experience. Is that how you got hurt? Asked Mrs. Fitzgibbons. I got there a few seconds late. I decided there was still time, but I was wrong, dreadfully wrong. Now at the arch in the rosebush, Mr. Ages left them. With his cast, he could not be able to climb through the hole into the kitchen. There was no point in him going any farther. Mrs. Frisby and Justin moved out of the rosebush and looked around them. It was light outside still, though the sun was low on the horizon. Straight ahead of them, perhaps 200 feet away, stood the big white farmhouse. Now there was Dragon, already on the porch, sitting just outside the door, looking expectantly for his dinner. To their right was the tractor shed, and beyond that was the barnyard fence and the barn itself, casting a long shadow. Behind them rose the woods and the mountains, and to the left Mrs. Frisby could see the big stone in the middle of the garden, near which her children waited. Now, as soon as her task was done, she thought, she must hurry to them and get them ready for the move. Now, we go under the right side of the house, Justin said quietly. Follow me. They made their way around the edge of the yard, staying in the shadows, keeping an eye on Dragon. Justin still wore his satchel and had put the powder packet inside of it. There was the basement under the main part of the Fitzgibbons house, but the big kitchen had been added to later and stood on a foundation of concrete blocks. With only a crawl space beneath, as they approached the gray foundation, Mrs. Frisby saw that near the middle of it, a few inches off the ground, There was a square patch of darker gray. It was a hole left for ventilation, and there was the screen over it, and when they reached it, Justin caught hold of the screen and pulled the corner. It swung open. We loosened it a bit, he explained, holding it open. Mrs. Frisby crept through. Careful now, he said. It's dark. There's a drop of about a foot. Just jump. We put some straw at the bottom so it'll be soft. Holding her breath, Mrs. Frisby jumped blindly into the darkness and felt the cushion of straw underneath her feet. In a moment, Justin landed beside her. They were under the Fitzgibbons' kitchen now. Now, he said softly, look to your left. See the patch of light? There's the hole. The light comes from the kitchen. We've piled dirt up against it so it's easy to reach. Come on. Mrs. Frisby followed him, and they got near the bright hole. She could see around just a little. They were walking across bare earth, dry and cool to the touch. Overhead, there was heavy wooden beams holding up the floor, and above those, the floorboards themselves. Now, under the hole rose a small round hill of dirt. They walked up this, and then Justin whispered, this is as far as I can go. There's no room for me to get through. I'll wait here. Come back down as soon as you're finished. Here's the powder. He handed her the packet of powder. Now remember to tear it open before you go out to Dragon's Bowl. Hurry now. I can hear Mrs. Fitzgibbons moving around. She's getting the dinner. Be careful now, Mrs. Frisby. Be careful. Good luck. Now Mrs. Frisby first pushed the packet up through the hole. Then she, as quietly as she could, grasping both sides, she pulled herself up and into the kitchen. It was light there, but Mr. Aegis had not been joking when he said the ceiling was low. There was no less than an inch between the floor and the bottom of the cabinet. In that she could not walk properly, but had to flatten herself out to crawl. She did a few steps and discovered that she was trembling. Stay calm, she told herself. Now, don't get panicky, or you'll do something foolish and spoil everything. Thus admonished, she crept forward again until she was near the edge of a cabinet. She stopped. From there she could see out into the kitchen fairly well. Straight across from her stood a big white gas stove, and in front of it, putting the lid on a pot, stood Mrs. Fitzgibbons. Because the edge of the cabinet was low, Mrs. Frisby could not see her head, but only up to her shoulders. There, Mrs. Fitzgibbons said, as if to herself, the stew is done and the bread's in the oven, and the table is set. Where was the cat's bowl? Mrs. Frisby looked to her right, and Mr. Aegis, as he had said, there it was, blue, with the words inscribed around the side, Kitty. Yet something was wrong. It was not 2 feet away from the cabinet, but more like 4 or 5. In the corner, where it should have been, rose 4 round wooden legs. She realized that she was looking at the bottom of a kitchen stool. No matter, she thought. The extra distance is just a couple of feet. Mr. Aegis had not mentioned a stool, but perhaps they moved it. She crawled to her right, as close to the bowl as she could get without showing herself, and tore open the package. And just as she did, Mrs. Fitzgibbon walked over from the stove. Her hand appeared, picked up the bowl, and Mrs. Frisby heard a thump on the counter over her head. A cutting board, a can opener, a scrape of a spoon, and the bowl was back on the floor. The strong fishy smell of cat food, Mrs. Fitzgibbons walked away. Now, Mrs. Frisby moved swiftly out into the room across the open floor, holding the powder, her eyes intent only on the bowl. She was no longer trembling. She poured in the powder, which instantly dissolved in a moist cat food. Still clutching the paper, she turned and sped toward the cabinet. With a bang, the lights went dim. The ceiling, which had somehow been curved, was filled with little round moons. Mrs. Frisby kept running, and her feet were struck a cold, hard wall of metal. Oh my gosh! A voice shouted. Mother! Don't let Dragon in yet! I've caught a mouse! Billy, the younger Fitzgibbons' son, had been sitting on the kitchen stool, his feet up on the rung, eating berries from a colander. The colander upside down was now on top of Mrs. Frisby. Oh my gosh, children. Mrs. Frisby is caught. Is everything doomed? Will she be able to escape? Will the rats move the house? I don't know. What do you think will happen now that Mrs. Frisby is caught? And I can't wait for tomorrow, because listen to the next chapter, 7 Dead Rats. OMG. I cannot wait to read this. All right, my beautiful children, I want you to go in. I want you to write 3 to 4 sentences and tell me, what do you think is going to happen to the mission? Will they be able to move the house? Will they move the house? And what will happen with poor Mrs. Frisby now that Billy Fitzgibbon has caught her? Enjoy your day, work hard, and I will talk to you all soon.